somewhere in Austin, Texas, a man who spent 11 years sleeping under a highway overpass now waters tomatoes outside his own front door. His home cost less than a used pickup truck, and it was built not by the government, but by ordinary volunteers who decided to stop waiting for someone else to fix things. All across America, people are quietly building what some are calling glamping pods for the homeless. Tiny, warm, dignified shelters that cost a fraction of an apartment. Today, we're counting down 10 of them, from backyard weekend builds to an entire village in Texas. And number 1 might just restore your faith in this country. Before we start the countdown, one quick thing worth understanding because it explains why this movement is spreading so fast. Researchers have estimated that a single chronically homeless person can cost taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars every year once you add up emergency room visits, ambulance rides, police calls, and shelter beds. A single night in an emergency shelter can cost a city more than a decent hotel room. And building traditional low-income housing can run several $100,000 per unit, tied up in permits and construction for years while people wait outside in the cold. These pods flip that math completely. Some cost less than a riding lawnmower. Some go up in an afternoon. And because they're so cheap and so simple, the people building them aren't developers or bureaucrats. They're retirees, church groups, veterans, and even teenagers picking up hammers themselves. Keep that in mind as we count these down, because the further we go, the bigger these projects get. So, let's get into it. Number 10. The garden shed conversion. Walk into any home improvement store in America and you'll see them lined up in the parking lot, those little wooden storage sheds meant for lawnmowers and Christmas decorations. They usually run somewhere between $1,500 and $3,000, delivered flat or fully assembled. Well, in towns across Ohio, Missouri, and upstate New York, retirees and handymen have been buying these sheds and transforming them into snug sleeping pods. The recipe is almost always the same. Rigid foam insulation glued into the walls and ceiling, a sheet of plywood over the top, a locking door with a deadbolt, a small window for light and ventilation, a raised bed frame to keep the sleeper off the cold floor, and a safe electric heater on a timer. One retired carpenter in the Midwest reportedly finished his first conversion in a single weekend and gave it to a local shelter program before the first snow. He'd spent his whole career building houses for people who could afford them. This one, he said, felt different. Is it fancy? No. There's no plumbing, no kitchen. And in most towns, these units only work when a church or a nonprofit hosts them on private land with bathrooms nearby. Critics say sheds aren't real housing, and they're right. Nobody claims they are. When the wind chill drops below zero and the nearest shelter bed is full, a dry, insulated shed with a door that locks isn't a policy debate. It's the difference between a rough night and a funeral. They're a warm bridge to something better. But the next pod on our list was designed from day one to be exactly that. Number 9. The Conestoga Hut. If you drive through Eugene, Oregon, you might spot clusters of small shelters that look like covered wagons from the frontier days, curved rooftops and all. That's no accident. These Conestoga huts, built by a nonprofit called Community Supported Shelters, borrow the old wagon shape because that curved roof sheds rain beautifully in the soggy Pacific Northwest, and because the design uses cheap, bendable materials instead of expensive framing lumber. Each hut runs somewhere around $2,500 in materials, and a crew of volunteers can raise one in a day or two. No construction experience required. Inside, there's a sleeping platform wide enough for a mattress, insulation in the walls, a bit of storage, and a lockable door, which residents say matters more than almost anything else.
They're weatherproof. They're insulated, they're lockable, which is really important because a lot of people on the street lose their stuff.
When you've lived on the street, where your shoes can be stolen off your feet while you sleep, the simple ability to lock your own door at night is a luxury most of us never think about. Eugene didn't just tolerate these huts. The city partnered with the nonprofit to place them in small managed camps they call safe spots, with garbage service, portable toilets, and a few basic community rules. Each camp holds a couple dozen residents, and there's a waiting list to get in. Here's the detail that surprises people. Neighbors who initially fought these camps, who showed up at city meetings angry and afraid, often end up volunteering at them once they see how quiet and orderly they actually are. However, the builders of our next shelter might surprise you even more than the shelter itself. Number 8. The student-built sleeping cabin. In Seattle, some of the tiny house village cabins sheltering homeless adults were built by high school students. Through programs like Sawhorse Revolution, teenagers spend a semester learning real carpentry, framing walls, hanging doors, running wire, insulating, and painting small cabins, usually around 8 by 12 feet.
I'm a 10th grader, and our 10th grade class has been working on building these Conestoga huts, hopefully to be used to house homeless people.
The finished cabins are then delivered to tiny house villages run by the Low Income Housing Institute, one of the biggest operators of these villages in the country. The cabins cost a few $1,000s in materials, often covered by donations from local businesses, and the labor is free because the labor is homework. A 16-year-old learns to swing a hammer, and a stranger sleeps warm because of it. Some of the students even meet the future residents and design details around their requests: a shelf here, a ramp there, a favorite color on the trim. Teachers say the students who struggle most in regular classrooms are often the ones who shine here.
I take what we talk about in the classroom and apply it into the real-world action.
Because for the first time, their schoolwork matters to someone. Residents of these villages, many of them older adults and couples who lost housing after a rent hike or a medical bill, get a private locking cabin, shared kitchens and bathrooms, and case managers helping them find permanent housing. Seattle now has more than a dozen of these villages scattered across the city, and the model has been copied from Tacoma to Olympia. But wooden cabins aren't the only answer, because some builders wanted something tougher. Number 7. The shipping container pod. America is sitting on mountains of empty steel shipping containers. Millions of them come into our ports full of imported goods, and shipping them back empty often costs more than just leaving them here. Nonprofits from California to Georgia looked at those stacks of 40-foot steel boxes and realized they make surprisingly good micro-homes. A used container can be bought for a few $1,000s, then cut open with a torch, insulated against heat and cold, and divided into individual sleeping pods with real doors, windows, electricity, and climate control. Steel doesn't rot, doesn't burn easily, doesn't attract termites, and stands up to storms that would flatten a tent camp. In Los Angeles, container-based complexes have gone up in a fraction of the time traditional apartments take, partly because so much of the work happens in a factory before the containers ever reach the site. Crews stack them like giant building blocks, sometimes 3 stories high, then paint them in cheerful colors that make them look more like modern lofts than industrial equipment. Residents often describe the same feeling when they move in: solid walls, quiet, and safety, things the rest of us take for granted. One formerly homeless man told a local reporter that the first night inside, he slept 12 hours straight for the first time in years because his body finally believed nobody could reach him. The downside is that containers need cranes, engineers, and permits, which is why our next pod was designed to need almost nothing at all. Number 6. The Pallet Shelter. This one might be the fastest shelter in America, and the story behind the company is even better than the product. Pallet is based in Everett, Washington, and it was started by a woman named Amy King, who ran a construction business with her husband and made a habit of hiring people coming out of homelessness, addiction, and prison, people other companies wouldn't touch. Listening to those employees describe life on the street is what convinced her to start building shelters in the first place. Pallet makes flat-packed sleeping pods, usually around 64 square feet, that 2 or 3 people can assemble in under an hour with basic tools. No foundation, no construction crew, no waiting on a contractor. Each pod has a locking door, windows, shelving, a bed, heat, and air conditioning, and costs a small fraction of traditional construction. Cities across Washington, California, Colorado, and beyond have used them to stand up entire villages in weeks instead of years, usually with shared bathrooms, showers, and meal service in the middle of the site. And here's the part that gets me. Pallet still makes a point of hiring people who have experienced homelessness, addiction, or incarceration to build these shelters. The people who know exactly what a locked door means are the ones building the doors. Now, the next village on our countdown was built for the men and women this country arguably owes the most. Number 5. The Veterans Community Project. In Kansas City, Missouri, a group of combat veterans got tired of hearing that homeless veterans were someone else's problem, tangled in red tape and waiting lists. So they bought a plot of land on the south side of the city and built a village of tiny homes around 240 square feet each, specifically for veterans with nowhere to go. And they sweat the details in a way only fellow soldiers would. The beds face the door, because many combat veterans can't sleep with their back to an entrance. Every home is fully furnished, right down to the coffee maker, the towels, and the food in the pantry, because the founders insisted no veteran should walk into an empty box. The village includes an outreach center with counselors, benefits specialists, and job support on site, and any veteran in the community can walk in for help, whether they live there or not. Veterans stay rent-free while they get back on their feet, usually moving on to permanent housing within a year or so, and the model worked so well it's now expanding to other cities across the country, from Colorado to South Dakota to Oklahoma. What these founders understood is that coming home from war doesn't come with a playbook for civilian survival. And without one, even the strongest people can end up on the street. And speaking of that playbook, if you or someone you love is a veteran struggling to stay afloat, or honestly anyone who's one bad month away from losing the roof over your head, we put together an ebook called The Veteran's Blueprint. It covers the practical survival and rebuilding strategies that are too specific for us to walk through openly on this platform, the kind of details that could get a channel like ours taken down if we said them out loud here. It's in the links in the description below, or just scan the QR code on your screen. Whether you're trying to protect yourself or trying to help someone else, it's worth your time. Now, back to the countdown, because number 4 proves that sometimes the answer to homelessness is sitting right in a church parking lot. Number 4, sacred settlements. In Minnesota, a nonprofit called Settled asked a question that made a lot of people uncomfortable. Churches across America own enormous amounts of land, lawns, lots, and green space that sit empty 6 days a week. What if tiny homes for the homeless went right there? The idea came out of years of research by the group's founder, who spent time studying why people fall into chronic homelessness and kept landing on the same answer. It usually isn't just money. It's the total collapse of a person's relationships, the moment when there's no longer a single person left to call. So Settled designed a model to rebuild exactly that. The result is what they call sacred settlements, small clusters of tiny homes placed on church property, with the congregation providing the community around them. But Settled added one detail nobody else on this list tried. In these settlements, some of the tiny homes are occupied by volunteer members of the church who choose to live alongside their formerly homeless neighbors, not as staff, but as neighbors. They call them intentional neighbors, ordinary families and retirees who downsize into a tiny home on purpose, so that the people next door are never alone again. Ordinary families and retirees who downsize into a tiny home on purpose, so that the people next door are never alone again. Residents share meals, gardens, workshops, and common spaces, and people who spent years being invisible suddenly have 50 people who know their name. State lawmakers in Minnesota even passed legislation making it easier for faith communities to do this, clearing away zoning barriers that had blocked the first settlements for years. It's an old idea, really. Love thy neighbor, except with a foundation and a front porch. But if you want to see this idea at city scale, we have to go to Los Angeles. Number 3. The Hope of the Valley Villages. Los Angeles has one of the largest homeless populations in the nation, tens of thousands of people sleeping in tents, cars, and riverbeds. And for years, the story there was only bad news. Then, a nonprofit called Hope of the Valley, started by a pastor who began with little more than a soup kitchen, started building what might be the most photographed shelter villages in America. Clusters of small pods painted in bright oranges, blues, and yellows, arranged like tiny, cheerful neighborhoods in North Hollywood and beyond. From the freeway, some of them look like art installations. Each pod, many of them made by that same Pallet company from number 6, has beds, heat, air conditioning, and a locking door, and the villages include showers, laundry, 3 meals a day, pet areas, and caseworkers on site helping residents get documents, benefits, and permanent apartments. One of these villages went from empty lot to housing people in a matter of months, which by Los Angeles construction standards is practically a miracle, and at a small fraction of what the city was spending per unit on traditional homeless housing. Residents are mostly local, often older adults priced out of apartments they'd lived in for decades. That detail stops a lot of viewers cold because it's the part nobody likes to say. Many of today's homeless are yesterday's ordinary retirees, people who worked their whole lives and got outlived by their rent. Which is exactly why our next entry, built by a printer the size of a truck, matters so much. Number 2. The 3D Printed Pod. In Austin, Texas, a construction company called Icon builds homes with a giant printer that squeezes out layers of concrete like toothpaste, following a computer design line by line. The machine runs along a track, laying down bead after bead of a special concrete mix, and the walls of a small home rise in a matter of days with a crew of just a few people watching over it. The results are stronger than wood framing, resistant to fire, mold, and termites, with curved corrugated walls that look genuinely beautiful, more like sculpture than construction. Icon printed welcome centers and homes for a village in Austin, and suddenly printed housing for the homeless was real, standing and occupied, with residents living inside walls that came out of a nozzle. The promise here is enormous. Labor is the single biggest expense in American construction, and it's the one thing a printer barely needs. If printing walls slashes that cost, then dignified microhomes could eventually be produced the way we produce cars. Affordable, repeatable, fast. The company has since printed entire market-rate neighborhoods north of Austin, which means every regular home they print makes the technology cheaper for the shelters that follow. And the village where those first printed homes went? That brings us to number 1, and honestly, nothing else in America compares. Number 1. Community First Village. On 51 acres just outside Austin, Texas, sits what might be the most hopeful neighborhood in the country. Community First Village was founded by a man named Alan Graham, a former real estate developer who started out in the 90s driving a catering truck around Austin handing out meals to people living under bridges. His nonprofit, Mobile Loaves and Fishes, served food for years before Graham realized meals weren't enough and started asking the men and women he served what they actually needed. The answer he kept hearing wasn't a house, it was a home with people around it. So he built one. Community First is a full master-planned community designed specifically for people coming out of chronic homelessness. We're talking hundreds of tiny homes and RVs lined up along real streets with real addresses, with major expansions underway aiming to house well over 1,000 people. But the homes are almost the least of it. The village has community gardens, a working farm with chickens and goats, an outdoor movie theater that hosts film nights for the whole city, a blacksmith shop, an art studio, a woodworking shop, a market where residents sell what they make, a medical clinic, and a chapel. Residents pay modest rent. Many earn income on site through the village's own micro-businesses, and neighbors know each other by name. Graham's philosophy is that housing alone doesn't heal people, community does. Because in his words, the deepest wound of homelessness is the loss of family. Some residents have lived there for years and say they'll never leave, and the village welcomes that, because the point was never to process people. It was to give them a hometown. Visitors from cities all over America now tour this village trying to copy it. One man's crazy idea on a patch of Texas land became the national blueprint. So what do all 10 of these have in common? Not one of them waited for a perfect solution. A shed, a wagon-shaped hut, a steel box, a printed wall. Different tools, same idea. Give a human being a door that locks, a warm bed, and neighbors who know their name, and recovery suddenly has somewhere to start. And almost every project on this list began with regular people: a carpenter, a pastor, a veteran, a teenager with a hammer, a mom who ran a construction company. None of them had permission, funding, or a master plan when they started. They just started. If they can do it, your town can do it too. If this video moved you, the single most useful thing you can do right now is check out the Veterans Blueprint linked in the description below, or scan the QR code on screen, especially if you or someone you know is close to the edge. It goes deeper than anything we're able to say here. And subscribe, because next week we're looking inside the tiny home village that a group of grandmothers built in 90 days. You won't want to miss that one.